Well, it means to be awake to who you really are and starting with the understanding that we come into the world as a whole and perfect being. And then the world programs us to believe that we're broken or damaged in some way. So, in the simplest form, being conscious is being awake to our true nature, to our essential self, not the personality self or the collection of stories we're carrying around about ourselves and the world. Hi, everyone. I'm TJ Woodward, and this is Your Superior Self.
TJ, my friend, I want to say thank you for taking the time. This is going to be an amazing conversation. You have to be the best dressed guest I've had to date. I mean, we are matching, we're on that same wavelength. And I kind of have a feeling this is going to be a very impactful conversation. So, TJ, thank you, buddy.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and be in conversation with you.
Mm. So, your new book, when does it come out? Is it out now?
Well, so I actually have three books. So I'm not sure which one. They're all out. Conscious Recovery, I think, is the one we are going to talk about.
Mhm.
That came out in 2017. So it's been out a while.
Oh, wow. Conscious recovery. What does it mean to be conscious?
Well, it means to be awake to who you really are and starting with the understanding that we come into the world as a whole and perfect being. And then the world programs us to believe that we're broken or damaged in some way. So, in the simplest form, being conscious is being awake to our true nature, to our essential self, not the personality self or the collection of stories we're carrying around about ourselves and the world.
Tough question, man. I don't know. I don't know. I want to throw you this curveball, but I'm kind of nervous. What is our true self?
Well, our true self to me is the essential self. It's the place within us that is unharmed and unharmable. Depending on your language, depending on the way you want to frame it, you could call it your spiritual self, your essential self. Buddhists call it Buddhist nature. Some might call it God consciousness, but it really is that place within ourselves that is beyond the human experience. It really is the spiritual essence that we are, or as I like to say, who we really be. But I know that's not grammatically correct.
Who we really be. Yeah, well, that's the name of the game, right? To be. How often do you be, right? Like I'm always in the moment, kind of in my thoughts, in my programming and this situation. It seems like the environment sometimes controls us, right? Like in your history, right? In your experience, especially with addiction, do you find that to be true? Is it the a lot of the environment has that much influence on us?
Yes, and it really has such an impact early in our life that we make these fundamental decisions, or what I call core false beliefs. And we make these decisions before we're even developed, our brain is even developed enough to understand. But once we make these core decisions, like I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, the world's not safe, so many different core false beliefs that people carry around, then that becomes our operating system, if you will. And then we see it everywhere. That becomes the lens at which we look at life through. And as you say, most of us are unconscious of all of this and not even realizing that what's in the subconscious or the unconscious is actually running the show until we wake up and realize that we can heal that and actually then start to make different conscious choices.
Mm. Let's talk about your story, right? Like some context for listeners right now. What has been your journey with addiction?
Well, I talk about coming into the world as whole and perfect because that really is my experience. I remember being really happy as a really small child, and around the age 7, closing off, shutting down, making these massive decisions about myself. I believed I was unlovable, I was stupid, I was not good enough, and I carried that around, really feeling broken and damaged and quite shut down until I discovered drugs and alcohol. And drugs and alcohol actually brought me a lot of relief. So around the age 13, I started using drugs and drinking pretty heavily. And I got sober young, just before I turned 21. So it's been almost 37 years ago. I don't really
Mm.
like to add 37 plus 21, but that's a whole other conversation.
Mhm. So who made you feel stupid, right? Did people make you feel stupid? I mean, at a young age, right? Like that's where we're so vulnerable, right? that's where we receive a lot of our programming. A lot of it has to do with our brain states. Like, who made you feel unlovable and stupid, right?
Well, what's interesting about that is no one actually made me feel stupid, but I did make the decision. And I remember a very small or seemingly insignificant experience that happened in kindergarten. I couldn't tie my shoes and it was time for recess. And I remember, Trey, I remember like it was yesterday. I can still see the floor. I can still see all the desks. I can still see the teacher at the front of the room. And I felt so much shame and embarrassment because I couldn't tie my shoes. And she sent me home with this board with two shoes on it so I could practice. She did not mean to make me feel stupid, but I walked home from school that day literally reciting over and over and over again, I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. So I made this huge decision with such limited information. So she didn't really do anything to me, but for whatever reason, it was a very significant moment in my life.
Sure, that's a core memory for sure. How did you see that play out in your life, though? Right? Like, when did you become conscious of it, and how did it show up in patterns?
Well, it showed up in patterns immediately. I did really poorly in school. I didn't even go to college after I graduated from high school because I didn't feel like I was smart enough. I went on this very interesting journey with my career of not feeling smart enough. And then at some point, I was aware that it wasn't true, that it was actually a core false belief or a lie that I had carried about myself. And I kind of tried to talk myself out of it, which also didn't really work. But when I did some of the deeper healing, and this was really in my early to mid 30s, I started to realize that I had to heal not my conscious mind, or in other words, I knew and I had an intellectual understanding that I wasn't stupid, but that 7-year old, still that 5-year old, that 6-year old, that was still alive within me. So when I did the deeper work of healing, suddenly I went back to school. I started writing books. I mean, all these things came out of shifting that core decision.
Hmm. I've listened to a couple of your talks, and you talk about healing that part of yourself, really going into that 7-year old and helping um, that aspect of yourself heal. How do you do that, man? Because I feel like the 7-year old in me. Do you just talk to him? Do you feel the emotion? Is it through cathartic experience? Like, what does that look like?
I would say yes, yes, and yes. I would say we start to have a relationship with that part of ourselves that is, I'll put it this way, more gentle than what most of us received at that age. And it starts with, and you already mentioned this, really allowing myself to feel. When I was really young, it was too scary to feel. So what did I do with all of that? I buried it, right? I would go to my room, I would check out. There are so many different ways I didn't allow myself to feel. So I actually have a process in conscious recovery where I invite people to talk to their inner child with basically these three phrases. Ask what the child is feeling and say, it's okay to feel that way. You're safe now, and I'm here for you. So we really start to reparent ourselves in ways that we didn't receive when we were younger.
Hmm. I love that because I've recently stumbled upon Carl Rogers' work, like self client centered. Um, it's a client centered modality, and that's kind of like what he's doing is like, he's engaging the client in this positive regard, unconditional positive regard, and giving them what their parents could not give them, right? Just for whatever reason, not really faulting the parents for their behaviors or reactions, but more or less um, creating a safe environment, but allowing the client to come up with their own solutions through that positive regard environment. And I love that because it's like, it kind of raises our consciousness to that, right? Like it nurtures that 7-year-old part of ourselves that maybe didn't get it when we were that, at 7. But it also kind of, we can, now that we're an adult, we have the conscious awareness to really see what comes up. And I feel like, the shadow in me, right? It scares me to death, right? Like what is there? What is the darkness, right? Like, you don't really know until you shine the light on it. Like how did you deal with that shadow, right? Like,
Well, I love what you're bringing into the conversation because that's the foundation of my work, especially with conscious recovery. I actually go into treatment programs throughout the country and have a conversation with clinicians about the experience of holding space. And we hear this a lot. And, this, unconditional positive regard. I take it a little further and I invite people to ask the question, what gets created when I'm viewing the person I'm sitting in front of as broken or damaged in some way? And what might get created if I were to look for the wholeness within them? And so, quantum mechanics is showing us now that the observer has a profound effect. And many, many counselors, therapists, clinicians have been trained to diagnose and treat. So, you're in front of me telling me your story. And rather than being fully present with you, I'm diagnosing, I'm thinking of solutions. I'm thinking that it's my job to offer something or to fix you because you're broken. And there's an energy that gets created with that. And so, yes, positive regard. And can I actually see within them that place that's unharmed and unharmable and realize they actually have infinite potential? They have inner wisdom. And my role is to be open enough to create a safe enough space for them to access that. So I love this conversation because this really is, to me, the foundation of really who I've come here to be in my life's work.
Yeah, I mean, I experience it right now. Like we are definitely going over the symptoms, signs and symptoms of pathology, right? And you're talking more of connecting and treating the person as a whole, right? Um, in existential theory, they talk about some of the anxieties arise because of the person not being their true self. And I hear a lot of that philosophy in your work. But I think you take it a step further and start pushing it towards the soul, right? Soul dis-ease, right? What does that mean?
Well, as I said, we come into the world as a whole and perfect being, and then we get programmed to believe that we're damaged or broken. So in conscious recovery, I identify the root causes of addiction as unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. The reason I bring those three up is I want to focus on this spiritual disconnection piece. Most of us separate from that sense of who we really are, and then we start to look to the world to find relief. And we can call that an addiction, or it can become an addiction, right? So I feel broken. I'm walking around with my umbilical cord in my hand, trying to plug in to someone or something. There's a temporary effect, maybe of euphoria or relief. Then we get addicted to that. And so we come into treatment, a counselor's office, a support group, and then we think we're supposed to become something. And what I'm inviting is it's really about unbecoming. It's about unlearning and returning to that which is already truly there. And many clinicians, I think, because we've been trained to pathologize and to treat only symptoms and behaviors, we're missing this opportunity at a soul level to empower the person to reconnect with that true nature. And then from there, healing is a really, really different process than you're broken. What do you need to do to become whole again?
Sure. What does that look like though? What does the ideal person look like when they fully reconnect with that soul part of themselves and fully embody into this reality?
Well, I think you named it so perfectly. It's about the being, right? I remember at one point, I think I just woke up with this awareness that we call it a spiritual practice, right? Meditation, yoga, mindfulness, all the different things that we call a practice. And I woke up one day and thought, oh my gosh, what are we practicing for? Because I thought it was about the meditation. I'm going to go have this intense meditation or this wonderful, blissful meditation. And then I realized that's really how we can be in the world. And the practice is the practice of true presence and beingness. And when we're fully awake, we are fully present and we're available to actually tap into inner wisdom in ways that we never even knew existed before that.
Mm, I love that. Does your methodology deal with just one certain addiction type, like alcoholism, or is it kind of like full spectrum?
It's full spectrum because it's not really about the behavior or the substance. It's really about the deeper yearning at a soul level right? So whether it's shopping or sex or, food or drugs or alcohol or compulsive relationships, all the list could go on and on. There's a yearning and a longing for connection that happens at a soul level. And in that way, conscious recovery is really inviting people to reconnect with that, because it's not really about the behavior.
Sure. Yeah, I just learned about operant, I think it is how you say it, conditioning, where you are conditioning yourself from reinforcement and or punishment. So a lot of the times when we run from that anxiety, we're just conditioning ourselves to go away from it, right? Like, so instead of like sitting in that and dealing with the shadow, we just run away from it, creating, we might feel good in the short term because we're getting away from that anxiety, but over the long term, we just create more anxiety for ourselves because we're not fully looking at the pain.
That's right. And you said something that's so foundational, because we talk a lot about trauma now as it relates to addiction. And I identify one of the root causes of addiction as unresolved trauma. But a lot of times we think of healing trauma as going back and re-experiencing the trauma. And there can be some usefulness to that. But what you're talking about, and what I'd love to explore more, is this idea of simply being present with myself. So addiction in its simplest form is not being here now. Let me escape from this. Let me change the channel, right? We're addicted to drama now. Let me turn on the news so that I can get that dopamine rush of like, ooh, can you believe this horrible thing's happening, right? So learning how to be present and sit with ourselves, perhaps in its simplest form, is the greatest recovery tool we can have, or we could say the greatest healing tool, because learning how to be present with ourselves without running away really is that deeper healing.
I love that. Right. Yeah. It seems like our attention span seems to shorten just because of all of the dopamine hits that we're getting from the new technology. It just seems like, I don't know. It's like, I don't even know what the stats are right now on it, but I know it's shorter than a fish or something like that. I don't know. It's something crazy. But yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that. It was like, it's so funny about conscious awareness and like raising your consciousness, not like, not just only in the spiritual way, but also like in this reality type of way, and seeing your shadow and seeing your patterns and seeing your conditions. Like, I was not aware that a lot of the time, like, I will navigate away from hard conversations because of the anxiety that brings up in me. I didn't realize I was doing that. Right. And I don't typically drink anymore. However, I didn't realize that when I was doing it. I mean, I would assume that I was doing it to numb something, but I didn't know to the extent of like, I was getting away from the pain by pounding a beer, going out with my friends or whatever, right? Like, I didn't know what I was truly running away from until I actually sat with it and then really did a deeper dive. And a lot of that trauma was more so related to like my conditions of self-worth, of am I worthy enough? Right. It's so crazy. Like, we come in here as a full being, right? Like, to your point, and then we're conditioned. It seems like everyone's conditioned on worthiness, right? Like, what do you think that is? Like, what is it in our society that teaches us or programs us that we're not worthy?
Well, there's generations of trauma that gets passed down. And when I say trauma, I'm not necessarily talking about severe trauma or what we would consider trauma. I'm talking about what you're saying, which to me is foundational with trauma. And that is teaching someone that they're not worthy or not good enough. Most parents don't say to their child, you're not good enough or not worthy. Unfortunately, some do, but more of it is acted out, right? More of it, even someone who, for example, who does really well in school, but they come home with a B and the parents are silent. Something that simple, like, oh my gosh, if I don't get an A, I'm not worthy. We decide things at a very young age, and we talked about this, but based on our brain development and cognitive ability to understand. So like in my story, my mother had undiagnosed mental health issues, and she was also taking medication that I think was really affecting her, because back in the day, diet pills were basically speed, and she was taking those, right? So there was a huge obsession around the way she looked. There was a lot of mood swings. And because of that, I didn't understand maybe mom needed to heal some. I mean, obviously a 6-year-old's not I wonder if mom needs to heal some of her unresolved sexual trauma, and maybe that medication is causing her to yell and scream. No, she's angry, and I take it on and believe there's something wrong with me because when mom's happy, I'm a good boy. When mom's angry, I'm a bad boy. These things are so foundational. We're shifting, culture is shifting dramatically, and yet most of us still get that passed down, and so much of it is just energy. It's so much more than just the words we say to our children. It's really the energy that is absorbed by what's happening around us.
Mm, so interesting. So interesting. I'd be interested in hearing how your philosophy differs or is similar to like the 12-step program.
12 steps saved my life, and there's a lot of amazing. I think the number one thing that 12 steps offer that is phenomenal is community. I think one of the most important things in someone's early recovery is having community. And the great news is 12 steps, I think, are in every country or almost every country in the world. So in that way, like 12 steps far and above is helping people heal their addiction more than anyone else because of that alone. There is a focus in 12 steps, I think, on brokenness. You know, if you read the literature, there's some language around selfishness and self-centeredness. Centeredness is the root of our problem. There's a focus on character defects. I understand the spirit of that. There's also a focus on seeing addiction as a disease. And I understand too that that was, you know, in 1935, it was considered, you were considered morally deficient if you had addiction. So someone coming in and saying, what if it's a disease, was like this amazing movement toward healing. And now it's like, what if it's more than just a disease, right? Because if I say to someone, like it says in the 12-step literature, you can never heal yourself of alcoholism, we'll use that term, you only have a daily reprieve. So saying that to someone is also saying to them in some way, you're always going to be stuck with this. And then, of course, they say every single day, I am an alcoholic, I am an addict, and affirming that over and over and over again can keep people stuck. And so conscious recovery is intended to add to that, not to be a substitute for that. And I like to ask what if questions. What if that's not the whole story? What if, yeah, it may seem that we have character defects, but what if underneath that, there's still this essential being that is whole and perfect? So I'm just asking some different questions, I think, than what some of the 12-step circles are.
And then again, it points to defects, right? What are your
Right.
strengths as an individual, right? Like, that's why I love positive psychology. Let's look at the positive side, the strengths, not the weaknesses of the individual, and focus in on that, right? Yeah, yes, we have some issues we need to work on, right? The symptoms, but the symptoms are deeper than what, you know, we're not talking about behaviorism here. We're talking about something much more. Um, I just love your work, man. I think it's so important. I think that you know, as I go through this process of learning different psychotherapies, I'm not seeing a lot of this new paradigm come into play. Like, you know, we're teaching from the past. How would you move forward in psychotherapy?
Well, you know, I have a big mission, and that mission is to really be part of shifting the entire paradigm of the way we look at addiction, the way we look at mental health issues. And really, it is moving. The needle is moving, and maybe it's moving a little slowly. For example, in conscious recovery, I call addiction a brilliant strategy rather than a defect. I don't use the term defense mechanism. I use the term brilliant strategy. So all of it was managing something. So looking at it through the lens of strengths-based, but also through this lens of wholeness, I actually see it shifting, and it is shifting slowly. So I want to be part of really offering a completely different paradigm. And even a decade ago, when I was really developing conscious recovery, there was a lot less acceptance of it. And now more and more people are saying, yeah, this is really true, because they're seeing the efficacy of what happens when we actually empower someone to do their own healing.
What's your background, right? Like as far as, you know, is a lot of your literature and your philosophy based off your experience, or did you, like, you know, you recovered and you realized, had this awakening and was like, you know, I need to spread this message?
Yeah, I mean that was my story, and it kind of ties into the I am stupid belief I was carrying. So around the age 40, I had kind of an existential crisis, and I had a successful furniture business, and I was really kind of on this outer focus search again. I'll put it that way, and I kept having this deeper yearning to do something involving spiritual work, maybe helping people break the cycle of addiction, but my own journey. I was suicidal when I was 18 months sober, roughly. And I met a woman who took me on this spiritual journey of reconnecting with my true nature. And around the age 40, I realized that that was really who I've come here to be. My whole world fell apart, and I went back to school at 40, and I kind of came into the clinical world through the side door, if you will, because my degrees are in spiritual counseling and spiritual leadership. I actually was the spiritual director of a community, and I started working in treatment, fell in love with it. I was, at that point, over 20 years sober, but I realized that what I was doing kind of in the metaphysical or mystical realm and the addiction piece could be blended, and to be even a deeper level of honest or transparent or authentic with you. It was really an inner wisdom that was pushing me forward with it. I didn't want to write conscious recovery, to tell you the truth. I said no, which my mind often says no to these deeper awarenesses, but I at that time realized enough, I knew enough to know to yield to that and to let that book be born through me. And it started as a book, and then it became curriculum and workbooks and clinical trainings now. So it's become my life's work. That was a very long way of saying everything fell apart when I realized that I had this deeper calling.
Yeah, but I mean, looking back, I mean, would you have it any other way?
I would not have it any other way. At the time, I wouldn't have been able to say that, but I did know enough at the time. There's a term in sort of the spiritual realm that's called chemicalization. Chemicalization, simply said, is when our consciousness elevates higher than how we're showing up in the world. We have a greater awareness of reality. We understand oneness more. We realize that, as Lily Tomlin says, the problem with the rat race, winning the rat race, is you're still a rat. So I was in that, like, still trying to achieve, and I realized there was something greater. And as I had that awareness and that awakening, everything started to fall apart that wasn't congruent with it. And I knew what was happening. As painful as it was, I was really grateful for it.
Did you grow up in like, what was your background like religiously or philosophically? Like, did you have this concept of oneness, like metaphysics, any of this before like having this awareness?
It's interesting. I rarely talk about this, but when I was a really little kid, I remember lying in the backyard, as many kids do, and looking up at space and wondering, right, what is all of this? And I remember trying to get in touch with my mind didn't understand what I was trying to get in touch with, but I was really trying to tap into pure consciousness. I was like, there's an energy that's different than life. And I was confused by it, but I remember feeling that and feeling into that. And it was this felt sense that there's something so much greater than this human experience. And I remember, I grew up in a very actually open-minded religion. I grew up Episcopalian. And so I didn't have a lot of like, you're going to hell kind of, messaging.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did, when I heard about heaven and hell, I was like, that doesn't ring true for me. But I had an awareness that we were here on planet Earth to evolve. And that I was a little kid, right? And I was really aware that this was a very dense planet, or there was a lot of pain. I think it was when I was starting to realize all the ism, sexism, racism, war, there was a war happening when I was a kid. And that was breaking my heart. And I was aware, or I believed at that time, that we chose to come here, our soul chose to come here to work through it so that we could evolve to a more peaceful planet. And I think, wow, that's a lot for a little kid to be thinking about. But that's what I was thinking about when I was really young. And then, of course, all that got taught out of me. And I abandoned all of that until, like I said, much later in life when I started to connect with it.
So it was like a re-remembering of what you kind of already knew. Like we already know this when we come in. Then you had a re-remembering when you're younger, and then you forget it again, and then you have another remembering of it, and you're just like, whoa! Like how many times we have to forget, and how many times we have to remember, right,
Yeah.
for it to actually stick? I mean, that's the question.
Well, yeah, and the mind wants it to be that we're going to get there and there's a finish line and then we're complete. But the reality is it's a moment to moment awareness that we can always return to it, that it's always here. We don't actually disconnect from that knowing. As you said, a little child, a really pre-programmed human is so present and so aware. And that's really what we're seeking in a spiritual practice or in recovery or in therapy. And it's innate. It's really who we are. So I love that you talked about the remembering. I would hear a speaker, and it wasn't that I was learning anything new. It was that they were touching something within me that was a remembering.
Mm, that's so beautiful. What is that? Where do you feel that, right? When you tap back into it, when you remember who you are, what do you feel in your body?
I mean, I feel like a tingling in my heart, and
Mm,
I feel like kind of at a gut level. It's like this, ah, right? Like this awareness. It's almost like, when you go to a place maybe that you grew up in and there's a familiarity in the air or
mm.
this like sense of home. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, my heart center gets fired up. Like I just feel like, how can I have forgotten this? Like how can this escape me? And then 5 minutes later, I'm kind of back in the rat race. Like you, to your point.
Exactly. Thank you, Lily Tomlin.
Oh man. You talk a little bit about Eckhart Tolle, and he's a big advocate for, the moment, living in the moment. I mean, I think his realization wasn't, in the moment. I mean, there's so much beauty in that, right? Like, um, when we get down to it, we going back to the being, like, there's only being in the moment, right? If I worry about yesterday, that's not now. It's not being. If I worry about the future, if I'm scared of the future, I don't make a decision because of the future. That's non-being. Like the only time you can be is like right here, right now, like me and you right now, TJ, like being authentic, showing up as our full human self in this incarnation, in this reality, like just heart centers of fire, presenting ourselves and not giving a shit about
That's it.
what we look like, right? Like how we sound,
That's right.
like our stories, just connecting and allowing this life to flow through us and be authentic in that and connect on a deeper and much higher level, a soul level. I
Yeah,
mean, think about
I,
that, man.
that's really what the journey is about. It's really about this moment and realizing this moment is all that's ever existed. And yet the mind believes the past and the future. And, in 2006, I had a profound experience. I've had a few experiences where I could point to where I touched reality in a really different way. But in 2006, it was the most profound experience. And I was in India, and there's a whole story I write about it in, I
You
guess,
can't do that
conscious.
to me, man. You can't do that. You got to tell me about the story, man.
Well, I mean, the story is I had been going through this transformational experience, getting in touch with this calling to become a spiritual teacher, and my world was collapsing. Lost the house, lost the car, my partner left, my business was in shambles. I mean, it was all falling apart, and it was all perfect. And I went to Varanasi, India, and Varanasi, if you don't know, it's a place where many Hindus believe if you die there, you remove your karma, or your karma is, you move beyond it. And so people are there to die, essentially. And there's just death everywhere. And my friend told me, if you're sensitive to energy at all, you will feel it. And we arrived by bus, and it started instantly. We look over, and there's these two young boys, probably 12 or 13, and they're these two deaf boys, and they came to escort us into the city because cars can't go into the old city. You have to either walk or take a bicycle. And of course, there's cows everywhere. And these two young boys are walking us through. And as we get closer, I just started feeling this tingling sensation going up my heart, up my arm. and my heart just poured open, and we went out onto the Ganges on a boat, and it was the Arti Festival of Light. And just at that moment, my ego felt like it was removed. And I experienced reality in a way that I hadn't ever experienced before. It was absolute presence, and I only could see oneness. I could see beyond any construct of right and wrong and good and bad. And right at that moment, all the power went out in the city, and the only thing that was lighting the sky was the burning bodies. And the person who was navigating the boat took us over, and we just silently sat and watched the bodies burn. And this experience lasted for me for 2 hours, where I literally, nothing was solid. It was all pixelated. It was all like, there wasn't anything but this present moment. And, of course, then my mind came back in, and I wanted to stay there forever. But what happened, the ego came back. I still had a lot of stuff to work through in the coming year or two. But what happened is I had a permanent shift in the way I related to my ego. It wasn't removed, but I realized it wasn't who I was or who I am. And that fundamental shift then created a very different relationship. It was a more loving relationship with my stories, my core false beliefs, my points of view, my judgments politically, all of it. I could see it for what it was. So that's the story.
It's such a beautiful story, man. Like, I've always wanted to go to India. Like, I want to go to Egypt. I want to see the pyramids. I want to go to Israel. I want to go to India. But I feel like India is like, ooh, it's a whole nother level, man. Like, I feel like there's so many different, like, it's so many things happening, like 1,000 things happening, like at 100%, right?
Yeah.
Um,
the first time I went to India, I went because I wanted to have this profound spiritual experience, and it was 1992, and that's not what happened, but it was what happened. But I was very young, and all I wanted to do was leave. It was so intense. And I was going to this ashram, and in my mind, I was going to go like stay there for a month and have this intense spiritual experience. And all I wanted to do was leave India. And then after I left, all I wanted to do was go back. And it took me till 2006 to get back there.
did you ever have like, did you have that experience, like a similar experience to that in India, like ever again after that?
Well, just that experience in India in 2006, I've had multiple experiences like that throughout my life, and now I would say they're more frequent that I experience that. I think something permanently shifted within me, and it's so interesting because if I would have heard me say that, 30 years ago, I would have thought, oh wow, what he's saying is no more bills to pay, no more sadness, no more frustration. And like, not at all my experience, but my experience is there's been a shift in my relationship with it. And that's really what I hope to bring to people, is that possibility that we can realize we have thoughts, but we're not our thoughts. I have opinions, but I'm not my opinions.
Wow. How do you have that conversation with someone who comes to you as a client? Like, how do you kind of baby step them into, like, I mean, my mind, I guess you're ready for it when you're ready. And I guess the universe gives you like, what you can handle in the moment. But how do you have these conversations with your clients?
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. You and I talked about this. There is a resonance and a memory, a remembering. So it's not really, I don't really work directly with clients anymore. I do more training with clinicians, but when I did work with clients, it's really about an energy anyway, right? They could feel something. It wasn't about the words I was saying. So I don't need to say to someone, you're a whole and perfect being. I can behold that for them, and there's something that is felt, right? And then, when people read conscious recovery and they're early in recovery and they hear the part where I'm saying you're a whole and perfect being, I've witnessed people just break down crying, not because it's something that I have said that's so profound, but it's that they know that at a deep level, that we're speaking to something that's already alive within them. I'm not giving them a new thought. It's that resonance, like we already talked about.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Do you have any examples, like any stories, like life-changing stories from people that you've helped mentor?
I mean, so many different stories, but one that comes to mind is, I was working full time in treatment, and there was a client who came in, and he was presenting with a lot of anger, right? And sort of the status quo for anger is what? Send them to anger management. Teach them to manage their anger. They shouldn't be angry, is what we're really saying. Stop being angry, right? And so I don't have that point of view. I have the point of view of not you need to manage your anger, but we want to ask what's the anger managing, right? And so I worked with him. I can still remember the day. And we were sitting in the office, and he was angry, right? He was angry. And I just said, how has anger helped you throughout your life? And we just talked about it. And he was able to tell me exactly why he was angry, when it started, how it helps keep people at a distance. And then I just said, how has it not served you? And what do you truly desire? And from that, I think the question I asked is, what's underneath the anger? And he just broke down crying. It was like this instant where he realized that it wasn't about the anger, and everyone was trying to work with his anger. He had been going to therapy for years and treatment, and everyone was trying to manage the anger. And so that's one story that comes to mind. And it was just through the presence and being able to see something in him that he couldn't see in himself.
Wow, man. That's what do you think is the hardest thing for people, right? Like to have this conscious awareness that they are responsible for their lives, um or that the anger is just a mask for a whole different meaning. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, I think you said it. I think it's worthiness,
mm,
right? And we end up developing these what I call brilliant strategies because we believe they're keeping us safe, right? And so I knew his story, and I understood why he was using anger to keep people at a distance, because he felt that was safe. So he thought he was actually managing what was going on, but what he truly desired was love and connection. But did he feel worthy of that? Right. And so, we talk about in our culture a lot about toxic relationships and how to get rid of them. But we usually talk about the other person or the situation rather than saying what you asked, which is the accountability of why do I keep, or what is it about me that I keep choosing these? Not from a place of self-criticism or blame, but from a place of curiosity. Well, it's because I believe that's what I'm worthy of. I will always choose situations, usually unconsciously, to confirm the core false belief. So the healing isn't about working with the relationship or the anger or the addiction or whatever it is. It's really healing that sense of worthiness.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. And then another part of that, another aspect of that is like the projection that we have in our reality of like the people, the characters, like that is our different, like a mirror into ourself. I never really realized that, right? Like I don't like that person because they make me feel blah, blah, blah. But I didn't realize that that was a part of me. And I was just, that person is just mirroring that aspect of me that I don't like,
That's right. But
you
only
know?
100% of the time.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And that comes with freedom, but it also can come, what do they say? The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off, right? Like I didn't want that to be true. I didn't want to be like that person is such a fill in the blank. I like the way Byron Katie says it. As a matter of fact, my third book, Conscious Creation, the basic premise of conscious creation is that we're holding a camera and we're creating the movie of our life. And I borrow from Byron Katie. I always like to give credit where credit's due. But she says if you have a projector and you're projecting onto the world, and if you have a piece of lint on the lens of your camera, you will see it everywhere and think it's happening in the world, but truly it's a piece of lint. And our job is to clear that so that we can see differently. And so that's the whole premise of conscious creation. How can we actually clear the way we're seeing the world so that we can start to have a very different movie or a creation for our life?
mm, what do you do like when you have like a day where you forget, right? Like when you're not a whole being, like what are some methods that you use in your life to kind of get back to and connect with that?
Well, I think, for me, it's always twofold. It's what can I do in this moment not to reconnect with my true nature, but to remember that's who I am, right? So it's cultivating in relationships. So that is mindfulness, that's meditation. But the second piece is unlearning everything that stands in the way of me knowing that. So one process I like to use is what I call living in the question. So if I find myself frustrated, feeling separate, judgmental, like having a viewpoint about a political party, or the list goes on and on, right? I can say, what am I experiencing because I believe that? And just sit with that. What would it be like for me to feel connected with that person? What would it feel like for me to be more in my heart right now? So asking open-ended questions, because questions expand, curiosity expands, and judgment restricts. And we live in a world now where we have compulsive rapid fire judgment. I mean, I can't even, like, Twitter, come on. It's like, it's absolutely unbelievable, but it's perfect because it's a perfect demonstration of the human ego, right? Just all the opinionating. And so there is a different possibility here. And that possibility comes through curiosity rather than judgment.
Curiosity rather than judgment. I love that. TJ, man, this has been amazing. I can't thank you enough for joining. How can people connect with you? How can they purchase your books? How can they follow you on social? And maybe, I don't know, maybe Twitter, but
it's the one I use the least. I do have it, but it's the one I use the least. TJwoodward.com. All the social links are there, YouTube, and books. Everything is there. It's all in one place, TJwoodward.com.
Awesome, man. TJ, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like we really stayed in the moment and truly connected and remembered who we truly were.
I agree. I feel so honored to have had this conversation, and there's a quality that gets created when two people or many people come together with a willingness to be in that curiosity. So thank you for creating the space for that to happen.